Hey, let's talk about the connection between Hashimoto's autoimmune hypothyroidism and fibromyalgia. There was a great study done in 2007, and in fact, there's been a lot of studies that show this connection, but I'm going to talk about this one specifically to show that in fibromyalgia patients, there's a much higher rate of Hashimoto's. Now, to review, Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease in which your immune system turns on you and attempts to destroy the inside of your thyroid gland, and ultimately what happens is you have low levels of T4 and T3, and you start getting low thyroid symptoms like depression, hair loss, fatigue, different types of muscle pain, constipation, brain fog, high cholesterol, infertility. Now, some of those symptoms overlap with those of fibromyalgia. And fibromyalgia is defined differently now than it was 20 years ago, and that's probably some other videos of mine you want to look up. But basically in fibromyalgia, you have to have three things. You have to have widespread pain, you have to have sleep problems, and you have to have fatigue, okay? So those are the two conditions. Now, this study found out of 120 people diagnosed with fibromyalgia by the 20-year-old criteria, where they look at tender points and that basic criterion, they found out of 120 of those people, 40% of them had at least one thyroid antibody positive. Now, how do you test for Hashimoto's? You do these antibody tests. There's a TPO antibody test and there's a TGB antibody test. TPO and TGB are things inside your thyroid gland. So if you're making antibodies to them, an antibody is like a flashing adhesive strobe light that attaches onto something so that your immune system can find it and kill it. So if you've got elevated antibodies or positive antibodies to one of these two things inside your thyroid gland, you've got Hashimoto's. So 40% of these people, of 120, 40% of these fibromyalgia patients had one of these antibodies positive. 25% of them had both of them positive. It's a very high rate. Now, interestingly, when they looked at these fibromyalgia patients' thyroid hormone levels, looking at free T3 and free T4, they were normal. So there wasn't a relationship between having Hashimoto's and having your thyroid numbers be off. Now, I've had a lot of different videos about that. The other thing they found, which is also very interesting, is that of these fibromyalgia patients, they had a higher percentage of the following symptoms. There's a bunch of them, so I'm just going to read them to you. They had a higher percentage of dry eyes, burning or pain with urination. Now, that's often called interstitial cystitis, and we'll talk about that on another video. Had a higher percentage of allodynia, which means painful perception from a stimulation that shouldn't be painful. So like, brushing the skin being perceived as painful, or getting a hug, that's perceived as painful. That's allodynia. So just to review, the people in the fibromyalgia group that had Hashimoto's had a higher percentage of this being reported. They also had a higher percentage of blurred vision and sore throat. Now, all of these patients also had a psychiatric evaluation as part of the study. 50% of them were diagnosed with a depressive disorder and 30% diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And that is a real danger because most of these people, before they got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, were probably told they had something psychiatrically wrong with them. And I don't want to get into that issue too much, but I can just tell you that is, if you felt the way that most fibromyalgia patients felt, you'd be a little depressed and you might be anxious as well. Now, there are also some very clear immune system mechanisms and nervous system dysfunction that can cause anxiety, as well as the pain and fatigue and sleep problems that fibromyalgia patients really suffer. Now, one last little point about this, which I think is really interesting. Even though these symptoms did not reach statistical significance, the authors make a point of saying that these symptoms were better represented in people that had fibromyalgia and Hashimoto's, and they are the following. Non-restful sleep, okay, diarrhea, muscle spasm, tension headaches, and gastroesophageal reflux disease. So all of those types of symptoms we just talked about, you'll find all of those in Hashimoto's patients. I just as well could have been talking about Hashimoto's patients that might get diagnosed with fibromyalgia. There's a huge overlap between the two. Now, what's the takeaway point? The takeaway point is there's similar mechanisms. There's got to be similar mechanisms between the two, and it's most likely autoimmune. Now, the authors don't argue with that, but I sure as heck do. So if you are watching this and you've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, you need to get checked to see if you've got Hashimoto's. And if you don't know how to do it, you need to find a doctor who knows how to do that. Now, that's the first part. The second part is, if you find out you've got Hashimoto's, you've got to find someone that knows what to do about it. And just prescribing hormone medication like thyroxine and Synthroid and armor, that doesn't do it. That's not very effective in the long run. So I did this video as a kind of an alarm call for you if you're suffering with fibromyalgia, because you may also have something else you didn't know you had that could be causing just as many symptoms.